We are at the last parsha of the Torah, Vezot HaBracha. We started with Bereshit a year ago, and we've done every single parsha, and now we've gotten to the end. Just like we're getting to the end of Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. Tonight is Hoshana Rabbah, and tomorrow night is Simchat Torah. So we're going to concentrate on the last parsha of the Torah. And I think as is well known, as soon as on Simchas Torah, we will finish this parsha, Vezot HaBracha. And then on the assumption that a congregation is more than one Sefer Torah, you bring another Sefer Torah out and you begin immediately from Bereshit. So this fulfills what is written in Sefer Yetzirah. Na'ud sofan b'techilatan b'sofan. The end is wedged in the beginning and the beginning in the end. This is such a significant ritual that we do, that we end the Torah and we immediately begin it again. And so this coming Shabbos, we're already in Bereshit. So I want to read the last verse of the Torah. That's what we're going to concentrate here on, the last verse of the Torah. And of course, like every verse in the Torah, there are many, many, many different explanations and commentaries. We're going to concentrate on one of them. And here's what it says. First, it says that there was, the last few verses is, the Torah testifies that there never rose a prophet like Moshe, that God spoke to face, and all of the miracles and wonders that Moshe did in Egypt. And the very last verse says, Ulachal hayad hachazaka l'chal hamorah hagadol asher asa Moshe le'einei kol Yisrael. And all of the strong arm and all of the awesome power that Moshe did in the eyes of all of Israel. So we're going to discuss what's the significance of this being the last verse in the Torah. So I'm going to point out, even though we're going to wait a minute to see the significance, but since we end the Torah and we immediately begin the Torah, many commentaries read the last few words of the Torah and connect it to the beginning of the Torah. In a few minutes, we'll discuss the ramifications of this. So in other words, the last three words are le'einei kol Yisrael, in the eyes of all of Israel. What's the first verse in the Torah? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So some people read it, in the eyes of all of Israel, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So for those of you who have Orchard of Delights, if you go to Vezot HaBracha, I have a very long, deep and profound explanation of what does that mean in the eyes of all of Israel. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But what we're going to concentrate is a different aspect here. Now, the way I translated the last few words is that Moshe did in the eyes of all of Israel. But if you look at the actual Hebrew, it says le'einei kol Yisrael. Usually, if you want to say in, it's the letter bet, b. And usually, if you want to say to, it's lamed. So here, if you read it like even more literal than the translation is, all the power and signs that Moshe did to the eyes of Israel. So that's what we want to discuss is, what does that mean? All of this he did to the eyes, not in the eyes. So first of all, I'm going to point out what Rashi says. And for those who have Orchard, you'll see how significant this Rashi is. We're going to pick one aspect. So Rashi says, so what are all these wonders that Moshe did? What was this powerful sign that he performed? So Rashi says something we never would have thought of when Moshe broke the tablets. We would think the splitting of the sea, the 10 plagues, receiving the 10 commandments. That's the awesome things that Moshe did in the eyes of all of Israel, to the eyes of all of Israel. Rashi says the most amazing thing is he broke the tablets. Now, we're going to look at one aspect of that, but I'm going to point out now that the word here that Moshe did is the word asa. And this word, in a different form, comes as the last word of creation. Asher bara Elokim la'asot. This is at the end of Shabbat, the end of creation. All the things that God did to do. So everyone asked, wait, that's redundant. Like, what is that last word, la'asot? Asher bara Elokim la'asot, that God made to do. In English, it certainly doesn't make sense. Even in Hebrew, the question is, what is that word doing there? So it's explained, that word means litaken, to fix. And what's the significance of this? An incredibly important concept in Torah and Judaism is that when God finished creation, he didn't really finish it. He left it for human beings to become partners with God in the development of the world, the fixing of the world. This is where we get the concept tikkun olam. All that God created to do. In other words, he created all of this now for human beings to become partners with God in the management of the world and the development of the world and the fixing of the world. So here, we're going to read the same thing. All that Moshe did to fix the eyes of Israel. Now we have to discuss, what does that mean? So Rashi tells us what it's talking about, Moshe breaking the tablets. So everyone asks, how could it be that a generation that 40 days before had a revelation of God that was never before and has never been since the giving of the Torah at Sinai? And this, of course, comes after 10 plagues, after the splitting of the sea, after the beginning of God providing the manna, and the revelation at Sinai. And 40 days later, we're worshiping a golden calf. How could it be? So one of the answers is that their eyes weren't fixed. They saw all of this. They experienced all of this, but it obviously was somewhat superficial. They didn't see in a way that they fully integrated this new revelation and relationship with God. There's an expression that the eyes are a window to the soul. And this is actually true of all the 5 physical senses. That each of the physical senses, it's very physical, but it's the window to the soul. The soul is nourished. The soul can react. The soul can be in relationship to the physical world only through what it sees and hears and smells and touches and tastes. But especially sight. Especially sight. That's why there's such an emphasis on what's called shmirat einayim, in guarding your eyes. not to look at things that you shouldn't look at, or look at things that will leave a negative or a provocative, what's called rishimu, English, a mark on the soul. And we all know that I'm sure we could all look into our past where we saw something. Could be a movie, it could be real life, it could have been a tragedy that leaves a strong impression. Rishimu means impression. And sometimes for the good, and sometimes for the very negative, that we can't get it out of our mind, the image that we saw. So that's what we're told, to be very careful with the eyes. So here, Rashi is alluding to that the last thing that Moshe wants to do for Israel. Remember, this parsha is called Vezot HaBracha. This is the blessing that Moshe blessed the people. As an aside, this is just a beautiful way to end the Torah, with blessings. Now, this is after the whole book of Deuteronomy, which is full of rebuke, of what we've discussed many times, blessings and curses, of exile and redemption. It's in a certain way, there's a lot of, call it heaviness in the book of Deuteronomy. But here, Moshe ends with blessings. And the last thing is, what Moshe wants to do is fix the eyes of all of Israel. So we're going to take this a little bit further. Now we're going to go back to, what does it mean to connect the last three words of the Torah with the first words of the Torah? In the eyes of all of Israel, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So one of the explanations, and it's one of the foundations of Hasidic thought, is what's called chidush, renewal, rebirth, making everything new. Now, of course, that's a tremendous challenge. And this is one of the great innovations of the Baal Shem Tov, is that he came to wake up Jewish consciousness to get beyond rote and routine and to approach life on a day-by-day basis, a mitzvah-by-mitzvah basis, with full of enthusiasm and newness. So along with many, many other explanations, and again, I refer you to Orchard of Delights on this parsha, is in the eyes of all of Israel, we should be able to see how God is recreating the world at every moment. So this is just a beautiful way to connect the end of the Torah and the beginning. Because you get to the end, it's like, we're done, we're finished, now what? So we start the Torah immediately as the message that the holidays are now over. The Torah is over. So what do? You start again. That's what we do. It's a simple message, but to actually live it is obviously more of a challenge. So now we're just going to look at a few aspects in Pirkei Avot. If anyone wants to look it up or look it up later, in the second chapter, the 13th Mishnah. So this is when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he had 5 main students. And he said to them, like, go out in the world and tell me what's in a few words, what's the best way to approach life? What's the best attribute to have in approaching life? So Rabbi Eliezer said, the first one says, ayin tov, a good eye. If you have a good eye, so you see things in the positive, and what could be a better attitude about life? Rabbi Yoshua said, a good friend. Now, we don't have time to analyze it, but each one of these there's such beautiful ideas about a good friend. Rabbi Yossi said a good neighbor. Rabbi Shimon said, ha-ro'eh et nolad. No, excuse me. Ha-ro'eh ani et, excuse me. Yes, ha-ro'eh et nolad. One who sees, nolad literally means birth. One sees in the birth of a situation what will come from it. And the last one is Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, who said, Lev Tov, a good heart. So it's interesting. The first one is a good eye. The last one is a good heart. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, of all these answers, I choose a good heart. But if we really think about it, a good heart is dependent on a good eye. Because the opposite of a good eye is what's called ayin ra. It's called the evil eye. In other words, do we see life in a positive way? Or do we see everything in a negative way? If we see everything in a negative way, how can you have a good heart? But if you see everything in the positive, then you can have a good heart. So this is a very, very deep connection. And now we're going to see it's even deeper because this is pointed out by all the commentaries. What's the last letter of the Torah? It's a Lamed. The last word is Yisrael. So the last letter is Lamed. What's the first letter of the Torah? A bet. What does that spell? Lev. A good heart. So here we are coming to the end of the holidays. And we could say, well, bottom line, what are we supposed to come out with? What have we accomplished? How are we going to be different this year? And we can answer very simply, do you have a good heart? Are you ready to approach a new year with a good eye and a good heart? And so going back to the broken tablets, there's a midrash that says that Satan came and he showed the people like in their imagination. Here, the midrash presents it as if it's a physical thing, and in a certain sense it could be, but in everyone's mind it looked real. He showed Moshe's coffin as if Moshe was dead. And so therefore the people said, we don't know what happened to Moshe. We need to pick new leaders. And that's how they made the golden calf. So here again, this idea of a good eye or an evil eye. So Satan came and he showed them like a picture in their minds of Moshe's is dead. And they went after that false imagination. And it ended up that they made a golden calf. So here, the last thing that Moshe wants to do is he wants to fix the eyes of all of Israel, especially because we're right here, we're ending the Torah, and then we're going to begin the Torah. And we want to begin it with a good heart. And as we said, a good heart is dependent on an ayin tov, on having good eyes. Now, in the Parsha, there is another allusion to eyes. And this is a verse that says, it's for those who want to look it up later, it's chapter 33, verse 28. It says, Vayishkon Yisrael betach badad. And Israel will dwell in security alone. Ein Yaakov. Now I'm going to translate it like a drush. Ein Yaakov is like ayin, the eye of Yaakov. El Eretz Dagan Tirosh Af Shamav Yerafu Tal. So it's translated that Israel will dwell in security alone. Ein Yaakov actually means Ein here in this context means as Yaakov had said to them. Ein here means like or similar to something that Yaakov had said before. So Rashi explains that before Yaakov died, he said to his sons that God will come and he will take you out of Egypt. He will bring you back to Israel. And that's why he insisted on being buried in Israel, because he wanted to pave the way for them all to come back. So that's what Rashi says it means here. In other words, Israel will dwell securely alone, like Yaakov said. But here, it actually says Ein Yaakov, which you could translate as the eye of Yaakov. So what does this mean? Remember, one of the 5 opinions of the best way to be is Haro'eh et Nolad, who sees in the birth of a situation what will come from it. So here we see Yaakov seeing into the future. Here they're in Egypt, and it's him and his family. They came down to Egypt with 70 souls. But he prophetically saw what would occur, and he promised them that you will make it back to Israel and you'll dwell there securely. So this is like a prophetic eye who sees the birth. So now we go back to connecting the last words of the Torah to the first words of the Torah. In the eyes of all of Israel, in the beginning, as it were, God gave birth to the heavens and the earth. So in other words, as we approach the new year, we're encouraged to see how every day, every situation, every mitzvah, every opportunity is new. Wasn't here before, it won't be there in the future. To live like that takes a lot of spiritual work. But that is the goal. That is the goal. We're at the end of the holidays, and we want to take the newness and the joy and the introspection and the good eye and the good heart into a good year, a new year. We'll just point out that this expression, Ein Yaakov, equals in Gematria 312, which equals the word Chadash, new. So like Rosh Chodesh, Chadash, a new month, a new year, a new day, a new minute. So the eye of Yaakov, who sees the birth, is seeing the birth in every moment. So that's a great challenge. We'll end our going through the entire Torah, and we'll end with a blessing. And I'm going to add one other thing, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, so his last years of his life, around the last 10 years, he was encouraging everyone to learn about Mashiach, to talk about Mashiach, to anticipate the Mashiach. And he was known to have said many, many times, open your eyes, Mashiach is here. So this is based on an idea that one of the words for future in Hebrew is atid, the future. That word is used in Megillat Esther to mean to be prepared, to be prepared. So it's explained that the future is already prepared in the present. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe was saying, like, if we wanted bad enough, if we could do it, we could open our eyes and Mashiach is here. So there's a very similar thing that Reb Shlomo, that when he wanted to explain looking at something in a deep, deep way, he would say, you have to look at it with eyes of Mashiach. In other words, the future, but already in the present. And so when we envision Mashiach, when we look at how things are born and we see what can come from them, so that helps bring the future into the present. So I want to give everyone a blessing that as we end the holidays and get ready to dive into the year, that we do it with a good eye, with a good heart, and we open our eyes to our own potential and not being blind to the negativity in the world, but to open our eyes to the goodness and try to live life like that.